ఇంటర్మీడియట్ విద్యారంగంలో అగ్రగామి మన NSR ఇంపల్స్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్ ఇన్స్టిట్యూషన్. ఐఐటి జేఈఈ అయినా నీట్ అయినా తిరుగులేని విద్యా సంస్థ NSR ఇంపల్స్.
Now, hello students, let's continue with the inflorescence. For the last class we studied about leaf modifications, types of leaves along with the examples we have studied. So, make sure that you practice all types of leaves along with the categories, along with the examples, they are important, right. Now, so before we discuss about the continuation of that, let me give you the table 1. Now, in table 1, as usual you all know it very well, what we discuss here, it is nothing but name of the scientist, and along with that we just have to write discovery. So guys, I think I told you in the very beginning of the classes what is the intention to give the table 1 and table 2. Guys, every class you can take 2 scientists and the discoveries, because in the final need we have the chance of getting 1 question on the scientist and discoveries, 1 or 2 questions on scientist and discovery. Similarly, everywhere the table number 2 if you take, we are discussing about scientific names. Scientific name will touch almost in every chapter. So, if you can remember the scientist and discovery per day 2, definitely in the final need it assures you 8 marks. 8 marks means each question carries 4 marks. Now, altogether 2 questions. Why? Because we are discussing here, right? So, 2 questions carries almost 8 marks. So, to have this 8 marks, if you want to take 8 marks, let it be you write after 2 years, no matter. If you want to hold your 8 marks, your each and every day, your hard work, your effort in memorizing, in revising, who is a scientist, what they discovered, per day if you can take 2. For example, 1 week if you study, altogether 3 classes or 4 classes, 5 classes if you take, 5 to 10 scientists. So, for a week you can remember 10 scientists along with the discoveries, followed by next week again 10 scientists and discoveries. Guys, when you look back again, last week we have studied 10, okay, this week we studied 10 means it will not work out. You have to keep revise in your mind, okay, what was the 10 scientists which I have discussed before week, what is the 10 scientists which I studied last week, what I discussed and studied this week. If you keep revising from the first scientist what we discussed, that will become excellent work, excellent hard work it will become, because your young mind can remember so clearly when you make yourself revise number of times. That's why generally we say no, practice makes man perfect. How many times you put your pen on the paper, when you keep recollecting that what was the first scientist, who is the second scientist we discussed, third scientist, fourth scientist, fifth, sixth, seventh and eighth, that scientist have discovered so and so. If not immediately after practicing, when you are doing some work also, if you keep remember in your mind, if you keep recollect in your mind, that becomes a wonderful preparation and that gives you to your hand. Finally, your little hand can gain 8 marks from the final 8. You may be writing after 2 years, guys, you may be writing after 2 years, but this every day, that is why I told you, no, your hard work begins from day 1. Your hard work has to begin from day 1. Every day when you are studying, keep remembering the scientist names and discoveries. Finally, this table 1, scientist name and discovery, finally it can give you 8 marks, minimum 2 questions we get it. Indirectly 1 question about the discovery part and 1 question directly on the scientist name. Okay. So, as this is carries 8 marks, I do not want to put much trouble on your head. That is why per day I am giving you 2 or 3. So, make sure that you recap and recite and orally you try to recollect it back from the first scientist till today, what are the list of the scientists we discussed. Make sure that you practice on a white paper, because practice makes the man perfect, right. So, let us talk about the scientist. Charles Darwin is a scientist who was given discovery called a theory of evolution. What is this? A theory of evolution. So, why I am giving in the beginning itself, every class I am thinking after the class I am planning to give again, but class is taking such a long time. So, I am just getting it down. So, let me start today with the table 1. Who is a scientist to whom we are speaking now? Charles Darwin. I think in lower classes you studied Darwinian theory. I think you might have heard about in lower classes what is called Darwinian theory. Okay, so what is this called? Darwinian theory. What is Darwinian theory? When no organism on earth, the first formed organisms are called prokaryotes. Guys, we discussed in the before classes what are prokaryotes, what are eukaryotes. Now we know the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. First formed organisms are called prokaryotes. From the prokaryotes there is a development of eukaryotes. So there is a gradual development of what we say initially unicellular organisms were there. Slowly these unicellular organisms became prokaryotes, and from this slowly there is a development of multicellular organisms, and these multicellular organisms developed with complete characteristics and called eukaryotes. From there plants and from there animals. Yes or no? Right. So, in the primitive forms of organisms are unicellular, later you can see Monera, that is a prokaryotes, then multicellular organisms with the complete development of characters they become eukaryotes, and then they got differentiated into plants and animals. Of course, human beings also fall in the category called animals. Right. So, evolution, what do you call this? This kind of progression is called as what? Evolution. This is what is called evolution. Development of advanced organisms from the primitive organisms. These are primitive organisms. What is the meaning of primitive organisms? Primitive organisms means first formed organisms. Primitive means here we can write first formed organisms. So, when you take the study from the first formed organisms to the eukaryotes of plants and animals, this is what is called as evolution. The theory of evolution, the credit goes to the scientist Charles Darwin. Similarly, let us go take with the other scientist. Let us take with the other scientist. Now we can take Hugo de Vries. Hugo de Vries. What is the pronunciation? Hugo de Vries. Hugo de Vries. What did he discover? He discussed, discovered about mutations. He discovered about mutations. What are these mutations? What are these mutations? Sometimes what happens here, we say suppose grandfather, or we say grandson resembles to that of grandfather. Sometimes we say, sometimes generally we say, no, generally in the family people will say that, array grandson is looking exactly like his grandfather. Grandson resembles grandfather. So, grandson may not look like a father, but he look like a grandfather. If this is the case, then what you call this? This is called as inheritance. Inheritance. Who is responsible for this inheritance? DNA contains genes. Genes on the DNA responsible for inheritance. Now, what is in means within the family, in means within the same group, in means within the family. Heritance means transfer of same genetic characters from one generation to other generation. It is called inheritance. Inheritance means in Telugu we say Vamsha Paryamparamga, means grandfather lo una characteristics may not appear in father but may appear in grandson. So here the appearance of a grandson like a grandfather, it's because of inheritance, it's mainly because of DNA. DNA contain genes. Then what are mutations? Let us take other case. What is the other case? In some cases here the son either he does not resemble to father nor mother. Son will be totally different in characters. Son possesses different characters. Sometimes what happens, son does not resemble to either father nor mother, or either grandfather, he does not resemble to grandfather, he does not resemble to grandmother. Okay, so he does not resembles to anybody in the family. Either he does not, son is totally with the different characters. Son does not look and does not contain characteristics of either father or with mother, either with grandfather and grandmother. So why different characters? It's because of mutations. Okay, it's because of mutations. How mutations will happen? Because changes in the genes. Changes in the genes. Why? What is meant by mutation? Mutation is nothing but what? Changes in the gene is called mutations. Changes in the genes or alteration of genes is called mutation. Sometimes the genes which are present in the DNA, they undergo some changes, some alterations. Because of this, the son may express different characters which does not resemble to any of the person in the family. Son does not resemble either father or mother, does not resemble to either grandfather or grandmother. Son will have totally a different characteristics. Why? Due to changes in the genes in the DNA, it's called mutations. What are mutations? Changes in the genes. Who discovered this? The effort goes to the scientist Hugo de Vries. How to pronounce it? How to pronounce? Hugo de Vries. Hugo de Vries studied about mutations. What are mutations? Changes in the genes on DNA. As a result of this, there is a formation of new characters which does not exist in the generations. Okay, I hope you got the clarity. Let us discuss today the two scientists. Whatever it may be, you take the number. I am not giving you 1 and 2. Already we discussed some scientist names, right? Let us go with Charles Darwin, who studied about theory of evolution. I think in lower classes you studied this as Darwinian theory. What did he study? First formed organisms are primitive organisms. They are unicellular. They developed into prokaryotes. Later they got developed into multicellular. Eukaryotes later got differentiated into plants and animals. This is what is called evolution, and this is explained with the theory called theory of evolution given by Charles Darwin. Next, Hugo de Vries is the one who discovered mutations. So mutations, opposite word is inheritance. What is inheritance? Grandson looks like a father, grandson looks like his grandfather. It's because of inheritance. Inheritance is because of genes on the DNA which transform from one generation to other generation, from grandfather to father or maybe to grandson. It's called inheritance. For who is responsible for this? Genes on DNA. Then what exactly meant by mutations? Simply to understand mutations, I have given example for inheritance. Quite reverse case if you see, sometimes generally it happens, both parents look very fair but son will be darker. Sometimes both parents are dark but son, nobody is fair in the family, all are dark. Then suddenly the son or the daughter will look very fair. So here, the character is appeared as a new because it's a different character due to changes in the genes is called mutations. To make you all understand, I gave you the example. Suppose in the family, son does not resemble to either father or mother, does not resemble to parents, or to grandparents, does not resemble to father or mother or grandfather or grandmother, he possesses completely new characters or different characters due to changes in the genes called mutations. Who discovered mutations? Hugo de Varese. Now, let us go with table 2. Let us go to table number 2. Let us write about table number 2. Okay, here scientific name of the plant, scientific name of the plant, and we are going to write the common name. And we are going to write the common name. So far we discussed about Fabaceae and Solanaceae. We were in the family called Solanaceae. In which family we are in? So we are in the family called Solanaceae. Right? Now in Solanaceae, let us talk about Datura metal. So the common name for this is thorn apple. Okay. In Solanaceae member, we are discussing Datura metal. Datura metal is a scientific name of the one of the plant which belong to Solanaceae family. Now, Datura metal, it's commonly called as thorn apple. Similarly, Nicotiana tabacum. So, it's commonly called as tobacco. Okay, so what is the other one? Nicotiana tabacum. It's commonly called as what? Tobacco. Let me give you another scientist name, another scientific name, Lycopersicum esculentum. Lycopersicum esculentum. So this is nothing but scientific name for tomato. Okay, so I have given you 3 scientific names. Now, every time if you can read the 2 scientific names and common names, make them to use in your home when you are speaking with your elders or youngsters, with your brothers and sisters, so that the pronunciation will come, so that you can remember, because so frequently what we use at home in cooking or in like making recipes is tomato. Right. So, whenever tomato bath, tomato fried rice, whenever tomato curry is there. So, whenever mama said you, okay, today is tomato curry, and start calling that day when you are eating tomato, try to remember the scientific name of the tomato, revise in your mind number of times, that is Lycopersicum esculentum. So, whenever you want to talk about tomato, so you just use the terminology called Lycopersicum esculentum. Why I am stressing to use this in daily part of life? Why? Because if you know the scientific names of the most of the plants, and everywhere the scientific names comes in all the chapters, and almost in most of the chapters in our syllabus, this all scientific names comes. At that time, no need to ask anybody, in the textbook, in the textual line, in the textbook line, it's given about Lycopersicum esculentum. What is Lycopersicum esculentum? No need to stuck up in your reading. When you are reading the textbook, no need to stuck up. When you read this as Lycopersicum esculentum, automatically your young mind strikes that, oh, this is the scientific name for tomato. So, the scientific names and common names, when you keep revise, when you keep practice, when you learn it in every chapter, in most of the chapters, we will make use of this scientific names. At that time, you will not get any trouble. Very easily you can go with the textual understanding of the concept. It helps you a lot. What is it? Table number 2. What we are discussing in this? Scientific name of the plant and common name. So, which family we are discussing? Solanaceae. We call this as what? Vegetable family. Most of the vegetables what we use mostly fall in the family called Solanaceae. Now, which are the 3 plants we are discussing today? Datura betel, commonly called thorn apple, and Nicotiana tabacum, commonly called tobacco, Lycopessicum esculentum, commonly called tomato. So try to remember these plants along with the common names. Practice it on the paper. Try to remember in your mind, right? Now, let us continue further. Arrangement of flowers. Now, if you look at the arrangement of flowers, previously we discussed about two categories. Which are the two categories we discussed? We discussed the two categories called as acropetal arrangement and other one is called as a basipetal arrangement. So, one what we discussed is acropetal arrangement, other one is nothing but basipetal arrangement. So, you know it very well. What is acropetal? What is acropetal? You know it very well. Older flowers are at the base, young flowers are at the apex. So, opening is from base to apex. You remember what we have discussed? We discussed arrangement of flowers into two categories. What are the two categories we discussed? Acropetals. Acropetals means here what you study? Older flowers, what you study, are present at the base. Young flowers are present at the apex. So, when you see the opening of flowers, which flowers will open first? The older flowers. Older flowers will open first, then followed by young flowers. So, opening of the flowers is from base to apex. Okay, opening of the flowers is from base to apex. That is why base to apex. It is called acropetal arrangement. Then what we studied basipetal arrangement, you know that quite reverse of this. So, you find older flowers are here. At the tip you find the older flowers, right. So, here older flowers are present at the apex and you can see young flowers here. Here you can see young flowers. So, where young flowers are present? Young flowers are present at the base. Opening is from apex to base. Towards base, that is why it is called basipetal. What you can see? Older flowers are at the apex, at the tip. Young flowers are towards base of the stem. Right. So, which flowers will open first? Older flowers will open first, followed by young flowers. Opening of the flowers is from apex to towards base. It is called basipetal. So, we discussed these two categories, right. Now, apart from these two categories, we find arrangement of flowers further can be classified into two more categories. Nothing but centripetal arrangement. Other one is called centrifugal arrangement. So, we find two more categories. Okay, we already have discussed most commonly we find acropetal and basipetal. Most commonly. Right. Apart from acropetal and basipetal, in some plants we may find two more categories. What are they? Centripetal arrangement and centrifugal arrangement. Now, what is centripetal arrangement? Now, we say older flowers. What you can say here? Older flowers are towards periphery, and young flowers towards center. What's the meaning of this? The older flowers which are formed are towards periphery and the young flowers which are formed towards center. In some cases what happens? Now you know the tip of the stem where you find arrangement of flowers is called peduncle. Did you remember? Main axis. What is peduncle? Main axis with arrangement of flowers. Main axis with the arrangement of flowers, it's called peduncle. Did you remember? Here, so this is peduncle. This is the main axis on which we find arrangement of flowers. It's called what? A peduncle. We discussed previously, right? Now, here if you look at, from here you can see these are nothing but older flowers. So, these are nothing but older flowers. So, here you can take any whatever the shape you can draw. Then coming to the center, the size decreases. Then here you can see young flowers. Okay, so where are this? These are older flowers. Older flowers are located towards periphery. Periphery means peripheral surface. This is periphery, this is periphery. This is also older flower. Right, older flower is towards peripheral side, outer side. Older flowers are towards outer side, outer side. Then what about the young flowers? Young flowers are exactly in the center. Where the young flowers are present? Young flowers are present exactly in the center, or we can say towards inner side, or towards inner side. Then opening of the flowers occurs from where to where? So it occurs from periphery to center. That means older flowers at the periphery they open first. Here they open first. Slowly this will open. Lastly young flowers will open. So what do we say? Opening of the flowers is from periphery to center. So what is centripetal? We can write here. We say opening of flowers. From where to where? From periphery to center. From where to where? Opening of the flowers from the periphery to center. It's called, this is what is called centripetal. This is what is called as centripetal. I hope you can see very clearly. Okay, the opening of the flowers from periphery to center, it's called centripetal. Similarly, quite reverse of this is centrifugal. Now, what is centrifugal here? Now we can say older flowers are towards center. Older flowers are towards center and young flowers are towards periphery. Towards periphery. Okay, quite reverse of this. Quite reverse of this is centrifugal. So what do we say here? Now if you look at, this is what I am just drawing here. Now this is nothing but as usual we write peduncle. This is what is peduncle. Now what you can see here, center you find older flowers. So here you can see a bigger flower like this. Okay, so this here you can find some big flower. As you go to the periphery, you find the flowers are very young. So here you can see buds. So what do you say here? The older ones are at exactly in the center. So can you see the older flowers? The first formed flowers are exactly in the center and young flowers are towards periphery. So when you talk this peripheral side, this is periphery. This is periphery. What you can see? Buds you can see. Young buds you can see. Buds of the young flowers are towards periphery. Young flowers are towards periphery and the older flowers are exactly in the center. Then opening of the flowers occurs from where to where? Opening of the flowers is from center to periphery. Okay, from center flowers will open first, later peripheral flowers. Here also center to periphery, whereas here periphery to center. So what you can write for centrifugal? Stop changing. Okay, so what do we call this? This is called centrifugal. Opening of the flowers from center to periphery. This is called as what? Centrifugal. Opening of the flowers, why we say? We say first formed flowers. Sometimes they will ask you in different way. Sometimes they will say that the same concept. They can also write the same concept as I am writing here. Sometimes they will give first formed flowers are periphery and later formed flowers are at center. Okay, sometimes the question will be given indirectly. Sometimes the question will be given indirectly. What is that? First formed flowers are at periphery, later formed flowers are center. Indirectly they will give. You have to understand that they are speaking about centripetal. First formed flowers itself we call as what? Older flowers. They are towards periphery, they open first. Then later formed flowers means younger flowers, they are in the center. That means they are speaking about, the question is speaking about centripetal arrangement. That means where to where flowers will open? First formed flowers will open first, then later formed flowers will open. That is opening of the flowers from periphery to center. This is called centripetal. Right? Similarly, sometimes here you will get the question that indirectly they will give. So, the first formed flowers, they say in the center, and later formed flowers are at periphery. If they give this, first formed flowers in the center, later formed is periphery, that means indirectly the question is speaking about centrifugal. So, you know here older flowers or the first formed flowers are in the center, which they open first, then later peripheral flowers will open, peripheral buds will get open into flowers. So, the opening is from center to periphery, That is why opening of the flowers from center to periphery is called centripetal. Right? Now altogether how many categories we studied? 4 categories. Right? What is centripetal? Older flowers towards periphery, younger flowers towards center is centripetal. What is centrifugal? Older flowers in the center, young flowers in the center. It is called periphery. Right? So here if you take, let us see all 4 categories. One second. What sir? So let us see now all 4 categories together. That means all 4 categories, how do we differentiate in terms of opening of flowers? Only one common point in this is nothing but what? Opening of flowers. So, what is the one common point in this is opening of flowers. Okay, what is that opening of flowers? If the opening of flowers from base to apex on peduncle, base to apex means from the base older flowers, apex is younger flowers. Whenever flowers open from, opening of flowers from base to apex means you have to take the option as acropetal arrangement. Why it is called acropetal arrangement? Meaning towards apex. The first category. Okay. So, whenever we talk about opening of flowers, in the question if it is given from base to apex on peduncle, older flowers are at the base, younger flowers are at the apex. First older flowers will open from base to apex means the answer for this question is you have to choose. It is called acropetal arrangement. What is acropetal? Towards apex. Similarly, suppose if the question is reverse from apex to base. I am telling you what are the different forms of getting the question. Then this is referred as basipetal arrangement. That is second category, towards base. Towards base. Sometimes the question is from peripheral to center. Okay, the opening of the flowers from peripheral to center. That means older flowers are at the periphery, young flowers are in the center. First older flowers will open at the periphery, then slowly the flowers will open and they come to center. So, opening of the flowers from periphery to center means it is called centripetal arrangement, that is towards center. Towards center, right? If the opening of the flowers reverse from center to periphery, then it is called centrifugal arrangement, that is towards periphery. That is towards periphery. How many categories? 4 categories. See what we think, what is there in the opening of the flowers we may think, but if you look at the flowers we have altogether 4 different formats. So, whenever you see opening of the flowers from base to apex, it is called acropetal arrangement, that is towards apex. If the opening of the flowers from apex to base, it is called basipetal, that is towards base. Okay, if it is opening of the flowers from periphery to center, it is called centripetal arrangement, that is towards center. And if the opening of the flowers from center to periphery, it is called centrifugal arrangement, that is towards periphery. So, if you take the opening of the flowers, we find all 4 categories.